the Paul's ministry in Ephesus, especially with the disciples of the John the Baptist. Now, we have chapter 19, verse 21 and 22. We have a special statement that we need to read before we go further. Let's look at Acts chapter 19. Verse 21, Acts 19, 21 and 22. And this is what we read. After all this had happened, Paul decided to go to Jerusalem, passing through Macedonia and Achaia. After I have been there, he said, I must visit Rome also. He sent two of his disciples, two of his helpers, Timothy and Erastus, to Macedonia, while he stayed in the province of Asia a little longer. All right. So what do you see in verse 21? Paul decided literally, it is purposed in the Spirit. There is a debate here whether this is a reference to Paul's human spirit as an NIV, what I read now, or some other translations explain this different way, like NSB, KJV, as the Holy Spirit, as in the RSV. So what is that actually talking about? That may be our question. A reference to the Holy Spirit seems more likely because Luke's use of impersonal verb, they in Greek, I must visit Rome also, which usually connotes the divine will. So in chapter 20, verse 22, the expression would also refer to the Holy Spirit, indicating Paul's plans were in conformity to the will of God. So now we know that the whole counsel of God, whole will of God is not written down. So God was giving to them little bit, giving to them when it is necessary, speaking to them what to be done. So Paul decided according to the will of God, right? So Paul felt that the eastern part of the empire had been sufficiently evangelized. That means, what does that mean? Sufficiently evangelized means gospels started to spread, right? It doesn't mean that everyone believed, but it started to spread. He therefore decided to return to Jerusalem and then go to Rome. On the way, he would revisit churches of Macedonia and Achaia, ministering to them and gathering from them a collection for the Jewish Christians of Jerusalem, right? So his idea now is that he wants to go to Jerusalem and then from there to Rome. And he also wanted to get some collections from churches in Macedonia and Achaia so that he can give to Jerusalem church there, where there is a famine now at this time. After Jerusalem and Rome, he planned to take up a Gentile mission in the western part of the empire, using the Roman congregation as the base for that western outreach, just as church at Syrian Antioch had been his base for evangelizing the eastern part of the empire. So Paul was very, he's one of the greatest missionary ever lived in the planet Earth. Of course, Jesus Christ, but if you really talk about it, it is Paul. Now he thinks it is better now for me because eastern part is evangelized. He has to take the gospel to the whole world, and he wants to go to Rome, the church in Rome and Roman church as the basis to evangelize the other part of the world. So he He takes. So that's where, after that, we see this letter to Corinthian church is written. Some of the informations are given about First Corinthians, right? There is no doubt about the authorship. I don't think anything to debate, but there are some people all the time cast doubt. So clearly, I have given you the evidences, and I wanted to spend some time about the destination and other things. But First Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1 clearly suggests that it was written by Paul. Clearly suggests. Let's look at the destination, the city of Corinth. So First Corinthians and Second Corinthians, the letter is written. Location. And where is this? This is actually the southern end of Greece. And it's almost an island, right? A narrow isthmus averaging 4 miles, simply 4 miles, about 6 kilometers wide, separates this peninsula from the mainland of Greece. On the southern end of that isthmus, at the foot of 1,500-foot mountain known as Acrocorinth. Acrocorinth is a site for the ancient Corinth, right? So this is part of Greece, actually. What are the things to know about its history? Number one, it is one of the oldest Greek cities that Homer referred to as the wealthy Corinth. Homer actually referred to the city as the wealthy Corinth because it was a wealthy city. When the Romans conquered Greece, the city was plundered and destroyed in 146 BC. The male population was destroyed and the women and children sold into slavery. So this is happening in that 2nd century BC. In 46 BC, Julius Caesar had the city rebuilt as a Roman colony. In 27 BC, Augustus Caesar made Corinth the capital of the province of Achaia. In AD 44, this city became a senatorial province. So this is a famous city, wealthy city, but later, because of the war, plundered, destroyed, rebuilt again. And that's what I say. Commerce is an important thing because this history is very important for, to understand this letter. Commerce. Because of its location, Corinth was the center of commerce between the mainland and southern peninsula. It also commanded the trade between Asia and Italy, or Asia and Italy. In order to avoid the 200-mile trip around southern tip of Greece, small ships were hauled across the isthmus while large ships unloaded their cargo at the end of the isthmus and reloaded at the other end. Corinth therefore had 2 ports. One is Locaeum, leading to Italy, and Cenchreae, leading to Asia or Asia. A canal through the isthmus was finished in 1893. So what does that suggest? 2,000 years ago, city of Corinth was a commercial city with a lot of business travel. Various kinds of people from countries were coming there in Corinth. So it is very important to know. Inhabitants. The population of Paul's day was quite cosmopolitan. You see, even in those days, it was like kind of cosmopolitan city, right? And most of them were Roman colonists, majority of them were. There were many other nationalities, including native Greek, as well as large colony of Jews. So you have Romans were there, Greeks were there, Jews were there. Estimates of its population in Paul's day range from 100,000 to 1 million, many of whom were slaves. So again, you see a huge population right here in this place, right? Inhabitants. The next one, culture. Although not famous for its philosophers, for example, like Athens. Athens was so famous. Think about like, Plato, Aristotle, and other people were there. But they were, yes, so they were not famous like them. The city did cultivate various arts and was famous for its pottery, bronze, architecture. Every 2 years, the Isthmian Games were held, right? Maybe in AD 1512. So Paul talks about the unfaded crown. Think about that one, unfaded crown, connected to this Isthmian Games, which was second in attendance and splendor only to the Olympic Games. So it is very, very famous. Their sports, their games were very famous. The next one, morals and religion. Corinth had a reputation as one of the most wicked cities of the Roman Empire. You see, most wicked city. The term to Corinthianize, right? Corinthianize, or 1 second, let me see if I can change and read properly. Yes. So the Greek word is korithiasomai. It is a common word that was used there, right? Corinthiasomai, Corinthianize. It's meant to engage in prostitution, friends. Engage in prostitution. So, the term Corinthian girl, Corinthia Corinthian girl, meant a prostitute. So it was, the word Corinth became maybe a metaphor for prostitution. In Greek, Corinthians were usually represented as drunkards, right? That's how Greek things. Corinth contained at least 12 temples and 26 sacred places devoted to the gods many. That is Roman Greek pantheon, or the Lord's many. There are a lot of temples and idol worship places were there. So it was mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 8. Chief deity was Aphrodite, the goddess of sexual love. That is the deity. His heart temple was located on top of the mountain known as Acrocorinth. It was a center of sacred prostitution with 1,000 female slaves. 1,000 female slaves. However, it is now known that this was the description of Old Corinth, not the city Paul visited. In Paul's day, the temple of Aphrodite was small, though some prostitution may have continued. In any case, it is clear that sexual immorality abounded in Corinth. Remember, it was from Corinth Paul wrote the terrible description of pagan vice in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 to 32. If you look at, remember Romans chapter 1, verse 18, but they object the truth, right? And they say they changed the God's invisible attributes to various animals and creatures. They gave into sin. So Paul writes to Romans, but from where did he write? He wrote it from Corinth because he saw firsthand what happened in Corinth, right? So that is what we wanted to know. Corinthian city was a wicked city, famous for wickedness. But when Paul came, it was not so wicked like that, but still it was considerably wicked city. Church at Corinth. In origin, the church was founded by Apostle Paul on his second missionary journey. This event can be dated fairly accurately since Galileo became the proconsul of Achaia in July of AD 51. Right? Paul had already been in Corinth for some months, so it seems clear that the church was founded around AD 50. Right? So that is what we need to know. In the synagogue, Paul preached the gospel to the Jews and Greeks who attended. Paul was aided by Aquila and Priscilla, whom he met them at the Corinth, right? So we know the story, how Aquila and Priscilla joined Paul. At first, Paul probably intended to stay only a short time, right, in Corinth, but he probably wanted to go back to Macedonia, Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea, where he had sent Timothy and Silas. But God told Paul he had many people in Corinth, so he had to come and stay there. And with the return of Timothy and Silas, who brought an offering from the church at Philippi, Paul was relieved of the need to do manual labor and devoted himself full time to the word. Paul labored there for 18 months. That's 1.5 years in Corinth. All right, so that is what we understand the beginning of this church. Second, membership. Yes, not much. There were all kinds of people like Greeks, Romans, and Jews. Perhaps we'd say other nationalities as well, right? Yeah, so there are some Jewish people were saved, but majority of them were Gentiles in Corinthian church. And most of them were from lower classes. And some of them were even slaves at Corinthian church. Some had come from lives of gross immorality. Yeah, because very little in their letter suggests that Jewish background. Several texts indicate that they were former idolaters, therefore chiefly Gentiles. And so, what I would say, if you look at that in Corinthian church, all kinds of people were there. Idolaters, they all converted, came to the church. That's the main thing, and that's made up of Corinthian church. And from where it was written from Ephesus. Yes, Paul's contacts with the church at Corinth. Paul established the church on his second missionary journey, I already said, right? Paul wrote a previous letter, right, that I often refer to, that was written by Paul from Ephesus, dealing with the church's responsibility towards sinning brethren. So, the First Corinthians that you read, actually not First Corinthians, it is the Second Corinthians. That means the first letter that Paul wrote to Corinthians is not in our hands, not part of the Bible. But in our hands, in the First Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9, Paul clearly says, I wrote to you before. So there was a letter written to Corinthians even before First Corinthians was written. So that means at least Paul wrote 3 letters to Corinthian church. But the first one is maybe somehow lost. It's not there. Maybe it is a small one, but it is talking about church responsibility towards sinning brethren. Word then now came to Paul at Ephesus from the clouds of Chloe, or whatever maybe you want to pronounce, and probably from Epistles regarding Corinthians, that there are divisions, right? And so, yes. That is some of the background. Now let's look at the occasion. Actually, what was the occasion of, right? A letter was prompted by several considerations. It was not one purpose. Corinthian letter was not with one purpose. Yes. First letter was largely misunderstood. So he wants to correct. Second, there are problems in Corinthian church, right? And so Paul is responding to various situations, problems in the Corinthian church, like, for example, divisions and idol worship, sexual morality, and giving, like going to courts and marriage, again, idol worship, gifts, spiritual gifts, resurrection, all topics came, and then he wants to correct and write. So that is what we understand. One more thing to note here is situation at Corinth. Apparently there were conflicts between Paul and the church. Yeah, there were issues. Although there is evidence of some internal strife in the church, main problem was anti-Pauline sentiment. Some believers did not like Paul. That was initiated by few, and now it is eating the entire congregation as a cancer, right? So that was the one situation. Second, those who opposed to Paul were calling his into question and modifying gospel toward Hellenism, kind of Greek teachings, Hellenistic teachings about the resurrection. That is, resurrection is already taken place and things like that. And so he was trying to address those issues in this letter. All right. So please look at the outline is given there for you to look at. Right. That's it for us for today.